Meet Arlo Karimova. Arlo was a semi-professional European basketball player under the age of 16 before moving to Miami. He would tell you that he played like Tony Kukoc, but he was a little bit more athletic than that. He was a top 5 high school recruit at forward before he developed a nerve condition in his hand. He was right-hand dominant originally and lost all feeling in that arm after a hard fall in a game. So the doctors had to operate on it, and they told him that he would most likely never regain full function of his hand. He disagreed, but he also couldn't continue to play basketball with one hand at an elite level, so he moved on to other sports. There weren't a lot of other things that he could do with just one hand. Eventually, he was recruited to play football for Fort Lauderdale High School. He couldn't play offense, obviously, unless he decided to just one-hand catch every ball at 6'10". He was too tall to play basically every position on the field, so eventually he set on playing defensive end. Initially, he really struggled at D end. He had very little technique and was definitely underweight, especially for his height. He had to get down to the timing to not jump off sides, and he needed to learn pass rush moves. He was way better at pass rushing, though, than getting off of a block and stopping the run. The most dangerous thing about Karimova was that once he got past the offensive line, it was nearly a guaranteed sack. He had the ability to load up and jump from a distance, and his length surprised quarterbacks. Pause. A lot of the time, quarterbacks misjudged how much time they had in the pocket after AK-47 would break free. His teammates give him the nickname Romanian Meat Missile because of the way that he launched himself at the quarterback's legs. Over the course of the season, he gained better pass rushing technique, he began to jump offsides less, and he even started to dominate a few of his matchups. He made sure to tape up his hand before every game, kind of like how old school DNs would have a club when they had a broken hand or something. He couldn't really feel his hand, so he didn't want to risk it getting stepped on or getting caught in a face mask. Surprisingly, his best move was a bull rush despite his weight and strength. He credited this to his insane reach advantage. He could easily push back his matchup without them being able to make contact. He put a few tackles on their Some of these guys were going to play college football, but he didn't really think he would have that opportunity. Until he started to get scouts showing up to see him at Fort Lauderdale games. He had a scout from USC show up to his first game in the playoffs, and he never expected that level of recognition at a high level. He had a few scouts from colleges like Iowa, Boise State, and Nevada that came to games. Arlo wasn't sure about leaving the East Coast since a lot of his family lived in Romania still. Most of his family didn't care about American football. They understood that he couldn't play basketball anymore, but they wanted him to be a 6'10" goalie. Not exactly the best option when someone has only one usable hand. But anyways, they were supportive even though they didn't know about the sport. But what happened next even surprised Arlo. Ed Too Tall Jones, the tallest ever defensive end in NFL history, flew out to Florida to practice with him after he garnered national media attention for his height. Karimova learned some new moves from Jones, and hype started building around the recruit. He got scholarship offers to every major college in Florida except for Miami, for some reason. He even got offers to walk on for Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. AK-47 brought his unique skill set from basketball and his work ethic to football and dominated the Florida high school football landscape. Arlo had his eyes set on one final accomplishment. He already had broken the high school football sack record, and he'd broken a record 5 legs this season, but he wanted that Florida State championship. There was just one school in the way, Jensen Beach. Arlo got 1 tackle for loss early, but eventually they got into field goal range and scored 3 points to start the second quarter. Arlo felt that Jensen Beach was disrespecting their defense when they went for it on 4th down, but they converted to keep the drive alive and get into Fort Lauderdale's red zone, where their quarterback would find his wide receiver open on a crossing route on 3rd down to get their first touchdown on the board. This shocked Arlo since teams rarely scored this much on their defense. But Arlo was not going to be kept off the board for long, utilizing a spin move to get his first sack of the game, and when it rains, it pours. On the very next play, he freed up his teammate who got the next sack, and a fumble was forced, and they had to punt the ball away. That defensive stop turned into a touchdown for Fort Lauderdale, and on the next drive for Jensen Beach, Arlo would get his second sack of the game. Jensen Beach went for another 4th down conversion, and this time Fort Lauderdale's defense held up and taught them a lesson. On Jensen Beach's next drive, despite Arlo's outstanding individual play, they started to march down the field. AK-47 was doing everything, rushing the passer, stopping the run, and even playing some coverage from time to time. But he was starting to get nervous as his offense had only put 7 points up through 3 quarters, and Jensen Beach was down in the red zone again. Luckily, the defense did hold up enough to force a 3rd and 17 where Jensen Beach would try a halfback screen, which would get shut down eventually, forcing a 4th and 13, where Jensen Beach's offense went for it again, and Arlo missed his signature meat missile launch to sack the quarterback, but luckily his teammates finished off the play. Karimova's offense would come up clutch for him, scoring a touchdown to give him a 4-point lead with a minute remaining, and it turns out after scoring 10 points early in the game, Jensen Beach would get shut out for the rest of the game. And Arlo Karimova walked away with 6 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. Ed Too Tall Jones was in attendance for the Florida State High School Football Championship between Fort Lauderdale and Sweetwater. You could tell that Karimova was nervous to begin the game because he was getting uncharacteristically dominated by his right tackle matchup. And even when he did put the tackle on his butt, he failed to sack the quarterback. In the first quarter, Sweetwater converted 2 huge plays on 3rd down, and then on 4th and 6th, they went for it and picked up the first over the middle. They were passing at will on the secondary, and the Romanian meat missile could do nothing but watch as he was consistently facing double teams or the running back was assigned to check him once he passed the right tackle. Luckily for Karimova, they bent but did not break on defense as they held Sweetwater to only a field goal. Finally, on 3rd and 10 with a minute left in the first, Karimova helped provide pressure while his teammate got in to get a crucial sack on 3rd, but Fort Lauderdale turned the ball over, and then Sweetwater took one more shot play before the end of the first half, and for some reason, a receiver was left wide open to score a touchdown at halftime. To start the third quarter, on 3rd and 4, Karimova was kicking himself for not getting the sack, but his teammate finished the play off. Our defense was starting to hold up. It was 3rd and 10 on the next Sweetwater drive, and we got another sack off of a blitz. Our offense finally scored a touchdown, but on the next Sweetwater drive, Kevin Ford found his receiver for a crazy catch, picking up 30 yards and nearly getting into the red zone. On 3rd and 8, Karimova got shot blocked, and Kevin Ford had all day to make a pass, but it would be incomplete, and Karimova took out his legs on the play. On the very next play, Karimova got pressure again, and they threw the pass underneath, and it would be a turnover on downs. But pressure rate wasn't enough for Karimova. He wanted to see sacks, and on the next drive after Fort Lauderdale scored a touchdown to take the lead, he stiff-armed the right tackle all the way to Kevin Ford for the sack, forcing 4th and 20, and Sweetwater basically forfeited, doing a halfback draw to end the game, and Fort Lauderdale walked out as Florida State high school football champions. The next question would be, where is this 6'10 sack monster going to play his college football career? Find out in the next episode. It was time for the Romanian meat missile to make his college decision. He had a lot of teams courting him after a record-breaking senior year. After carefully looking at a number of schools, Arlo Karimova committed to FAU. Some top schools wanted him to walk on with promises that he could get a scholarship later on, but Arlo needed whatever financial support he could get since his family struggled to pay the bills since moving to Florida for his basketball career that prematurely ended. So he was looking for a school that would give him a full ride, and he wanted a school that was near where his parents had already been living. AK-47 committed to Florida Atlantic University and would begin his freshman year alongside several other outstanding freshman defensive linemen given the prestige of FAU. It's also important to note that Karimova had scholarships coming from UF, Florida State, and UCF, but he wanted a small college experience and he wasn't interested in all of the fanfare that other programs offered. The question would be how well this foreign kid from Romania could translate literally and metaphorically to college football. He managed to put on a significant amount of weight before his freshman year, adding nearly 40 pounds now that he would be taking this seriously. He only lost a little bit of quickness while putting on the weight, and he had finally gotten up to 250 pounds, which was still low for a 6'10" defensive end, but at least it was something. The first game of the season was against Miami, the only Florida college not to offer Karimova a spot. AK-47 desperately wanted to prove them wrong with a sack to start his college career. He continued to dominate off the edge with his bull rush moves and his signature meat missile launch that had opposing fan bases calling him a dirty player. Some people were comparing him to Zaza Pachulia, taking out quarterbacks' ankles as he would slide his helmet at 40 miles per hour across the turf. QBs were getting launched into the air like rag dolls from the power Karimova generated from his enormous length. Pause. Some fans were puzzled as to why Karimova chose FAU, but they didn't know his backstory. Arlo's family could never afford nice things, even when he was a top-tier national prospect for basketball. The NIL money was one thing for AK-47, but the full-ride scholarship and the proximity to his parents is what mattered most to him. Like Nikola Jokic for the Nuggets, football wasn't everything to Karimova, and it wasn't even in the top 5, but the money he could make from it and the education he received from it was priceless in his eyes. He wanted to make sure that he had enough money to send back to his extended family in Romania, and he wanted to provide for them so that they could live in luxury, and so that when he went back in the offseason every year, he could go on vacations with his family over there. So of course the next step for Karimova was making it to the NFL. Nowadays, freshmen are already planning out their futures in the NFL, and Karimova was no different. He noticed that despite being a true freshman starting at defensive end, he received very little attention compared to when he was playing in high school. Karimova realized that high school sports are all about hype and college is more about substance. People didn't expect much out of him or FAU in his freshman year. That really annoyed him as he tried to bring his social media presence up during his freshman season. He felt like he had missed the boat because all of the viral clips of him were made by other people while he only had 200 followers on TikTok himself. Karimova felt like he was the Zion Williamson of high school football highlights, but he needed to figure out how to build his draft resume. He wanted to enter the draft after his freshman year, but when he mentioned this to his teammate Evan Anderson, who played defensive tackle, Anderson laughed a little bit and then told AK-47 that he'd have to wait until after his junior year most likely to enter the draft. AK-47 rolled his eyes and said that Anderson was stuck with him then. Again, the FAU defensive line was incredibly young in AK-47's freshman year. Besides himself, the interior defensive line and the other edge were all freshmen too. Despite that fact, they were ranked as a top 25 defensive line by metrics in the nation, which was absolutely unheard of. What happened next was even more shocking. Arlo wanted to prove his decision to go to FAU right by beating every Florida team that they came up against. He pre-prepared his teammates each week on a Florida College week. South Florida was no different. USF came into the game undefeated as well, and AK-47 displayed his dominance in not just rushing the passer, but in stopping the run this game too. FAU ended up blanking USF, holding them to 0 points, and despite how great the D was, there was growing concern with their offensive production. Local media outlets said that they wouldn't put FAU in the top 25 yet just because their offense had major question marks. One thing important to note about AK-47 was that he was a businessman. He was always coming up with entrepreneurial endeavors. Well, the Romanian meat missile, armed with $100,000 in a dream, opened up his first gentleman's club. Yep, that kind of gentleman's club. He brought in his defensive line teammates to hang out at the club, and he pitched each of them on being a co-owner in the club with promises of free TNA dances. His teammates respectfully declined, but that put Arlo in a little bit of a hole, and he didn't have enough funds to pay upfront for the whole lease of the club and for other miscellaneous expenses. So Arlo got into some shady dealings with some local loan sharks and secured himself enough funding for the club, but he was no longer the majority owner. The crowd AK-47 fell in with had access to illicit substances, and Arlo may or may not have snorted some of these substances on game days. He felt like it gave his meat missile launch an extra edge. FAU lost their first game of the season 9-7, and the offensive question marks were answered. FAU was unlikely to see the top 25 again this season after a terrible loss to MT. Karimova's substance use became a problem though once he started using it excessively. He was doing a little bit every day for the kick like it was coffee. He also became more aggressive, and he even injured one of his teammates during practice playing too recklessly. Karimova's brothers on the D-line noticed that his eyes were consistently bloodshot and that he was always hyperactive, and they came to the club one day to confront Arlo. When they arrived, they were shocked at how rundown the club was. What was once a clean, upscale gentleman's club now reeked of vomit, and it looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. They searched for AK-47 and eventually found him in the VIP, where they staged an impromptu intervention to help him get it together. They talked about how the fame was getting to his head and that the money that he was going to use for the business venture was going up his nose instead of going to his relatives in Romania. AK-47 knew he had f***ed up. He also knew that his parents were going to come to the next home game against Marshall and that he needed to sober up before then. Before he got the chance to think about that too much though, the next game came against University of Alabama at Birmingham. UAB also had just one loss on the season. Perhaps the craziest play of the season happened in the third when Karimova was short on his signature meat missile launch into the quarterback's shins, and UAB's quarterback got the pass off to his wide receiver Dexter Boykin, who hauled it in over 3 defenders. FAU had one chance to win the game with no time left, and their quarterback airmailed the ball 15 yards out of bounds instead of giving his receivers a chance to catch it. It was another frustrating loss in which the offense put up just 7 points again, while the defense held the opposing team to 14 or less. Things were looking promising against Marshall when FAU answered with a touchdown in the first quarter, but the offense stalled all the way into the middle of the third quarter while Marshall had 17 on the board. AK-47's parents were at the game, and they noticed a surprisingly unimpactful performance from the 6'10" edge. Arlo was getting pressure and even stopping some runs, but he didn't have the same energy he had earlier in the season. What his parents didn't know was that AK-47 was going through withdrawals mid-game. He felt like garbage on the field, and it was like the Michael Jordan flu game, but instead of the flu, it was cocaine. Everything would change in the game though when Henry Colombi, the Marshall quarterback, forced a ball into the end zone on 4th down that FAU's safety intercepted and brought out of the end zone. Every one of the Marshall players were more concerned with a blindside block coming from Karimova rather than trying to tackle their safety, who ended up returning it 100 yards for the pick six. Like it was mentioned before, if the offense isn't going to get the defense more than 7 points to work with, the defense might just have to put points on the board themselves. FAU's defense came up clutch yet again in the 4th quarter, getting pressure and forcing Marshall's quarterback to throw a bad ball that got picked off again and returned for another touchdown. FAU would steal the game as Marshall couldn't get a playoff in time at midfield. The good news after the game was that AK-47's parents were so excited about the game and the overall defensive performance that they didn't question Karimova too much about how sluggish he was. But the bad news was that AK-47 wasn't quite in the clear. Arlo was randomly screened for a drug test, and he was freaking out all week about the results. He knew he had to play in the next game against Auburn, who was ranked 8th in the nation at the time. Arlo was sure that he was going to get suspended and miss the Auburn game, but on Friday before the game, he was on the phone phone with his parents when AK-47's teammate popped in to tell him the good news that he passed the screening because it was only for PEDs. Arlo was ecstatic that he'd be able to play against Auburn, but Karimova's parents were concerned by what they had heard. If Karimova was worried about passing a drug test but it wasn't for a PED, what could it be for? Auburn and FAU were tied to start the fourth, but Karimova was brought off the field for a dime package when Auburn scored and FAU couldn't tie it up, giving them their third loss on the season. The next game came against Tulane, but Karimova had a really difficult time focusing on getting ready for the game or even playing in it because his parents had been grilling him so much about what he'd been up to. They didn't know that he co-owned a gentleman's club with some shady dudes or that he was getting clean from the Bolivian marching powder, but they were determined to find out. They told Karimova they'd like to have dinner with him after the Tulane game, so Karimova was trying not to think about what his parents might ambush him with at dinner while he was playing in the game. Despite the anxiety, Karimova balled out in his game against Tulane. Up to this point, Karimova's output his freshman season had been a disappointment compared to his projection as a 5-star defensive end prospect who had 3 sacks per game in high school. Tulane snuck in a last-second touchdown drive before the end of the first half to tie the game, but surprisingly, FAU's offense was looking competent. They came out the gate in the third, scoring a touchdown and kept Tulane's offense on their toes. Tulane would get into the red zone before settling for a field goal to make it a 4-point game. FAU's offense couldn't answer, but AK-47 removed any doubt in the outcome, racking up his 3rd sack in the end zone and forcing a game-clinching safety. After the game, Karimova went over to his parents' house where they asked him if they should have him drug tested, but rather than forcing their 19-year-old to get tested, they instead showed compassion when Karimova admitted that he had been using a little bit of white powder to help him before games. His parents sent him to a detox clinic, but it would mean that Karimova would miss FAU's next game against Southern Miss. AK-47 didn't want to miss the game, but his parents insisted on unplugging from football and his usual crew for a little bit to get some perspective. Karimova missed their game against Southern Miss, in which the Golden Eagles put up 21 points, tying the season high given up by the FAU defense, and FAU took their 4th loss of the season, and Karimova felt like he had let his teammates down. Arlo realized he had picked the right football program, though, when he was greeted by his teammates and coaches with smiles and praise for completing this program despite the team losing. FAU really wanted to build him up, and AK-47 rededicated himself to the game because of the love his teammates and coaches showed him. FAU easily took care of Coastal Carolina, and their final regular season game was against James Madison. Even though Arlo had a quiet day, his teammates were going crazy on defense, forcing a fumble midway through the 3rd. Then with a minute left in the 4th, FAU forced another fumble, and it looked like the game was all wrapped up, but James Madison had one more trick up their sleeves. With 49 seconds remaining on 2nd and 10, the James Madison quarterback found his receiver on the sideline for a game-tying touchdown to force overtime. In overtime, FAU got the ball first and scored a touchdown, and the defense showed up again on 3rd and 4, forcing a fumble to win the game. AK-47 finished with 48 total tackles, with half of them being for a loss and 8 sacks on the season. He was ranked in the top 10 for all 3 major awards. He was 9th for the Bednarek, he was 5th for the Nagurski, and he was 4th for the Lombardi. Since FAU finished with a respectable 8-4 record, they got to play in the Hawaii Bowl, which, for a bowl game, it's not that bad of a place to travel to. They were matched up against Air Force, who was coming off of one of their best seasons in recent memory. AK-47 hadn't read the scouting report and assumed that they were an option team exclusively, but Air Force mixed it up, playing out of the gun and running some option plays and really varied it up. The biggest play of the game came after Air Force's first touchdown when they ran a halfback screen and Karimova read it like a book, but undercut the route too much, leaving the running back and his blockers with nothing in front of them, and they ended up taking it for 57 yards. On the very next play, Air Force caught FAU's defense off guard, ran a toss to the left, and scored their 2nd touchdown of the game before the end of the first half. FAU answered with a touchdown of their own, but Air Force got the ball to start the second half, and AK-47 was pulled off the field for most of the series, dealing with a toe injury, while Air Force scored a 3rd touchdown to get them to 21 points, tying the largest amount of points given up by the FAU defense all season. Despite the beautiful weather and being with his teammates, coaches, and family, Karimova was pissed off. He was insanely locked in for this game, trying to prove himself as an NFL prospect, and he also was trying to prove that FAU was a legitimate threat out of Florida. FAU's defense came out to start the 4th quarter and clamped Air Force. FAU's secondary was getting interceptions, the front 7 was stuffing the run and getting pressure on Daniels, their quarterback. FAU's D did everything they could aside from putting 7 on the board themselves, and they were incredibly frustrated after taking the L, but they also knew that this was going to be the start of something great next year. Fans of every Florida college football team began recruiting Karimova to come play for them, partially because of his talent and partially because they were worried that the Romanian meat missile would break their quarterback's neck on any given play. In the modern age of college football, transferring is almost a foregone conclusion. Any prospect who performs well at a mid-major wants to go to a Power 5 school, so fans assumed that Karimova would change his mind about FAU after his freshman year. Surely AK-47 couldn't be happy with a bowl game against Air Force, right? But these fans didn't know Karimova was fiercely loyal to his teammates and his team. He started calling Fort Lauderdale, Fort Romania. His 14-year-old brother Kaysen started producing highlight videos for the sophomore defensive end, and the small Romanian population in the Florida area started rooting for Arlo, even though they kind of really didn't give a shit about American football, and they wanted him to become a goalie. Again, how could he do this with a club for one of his hands? The defense had locked down Nebraska in the opening game of the season until the final minutes when Nebraska got a few garbage time scores, but the season was off to a positive start for the Owls. There's only one thing scarier than playing against Alabama, and that is playing against Alabama after they just lost a game. Even though Bama lost their first game of the season, they were still ranked 9th, and without question, this would be the biggest game for the Owls in the time that Karimova had been there. The campus was buzzing all week with bring down Bama chants, and FAU students felt that they had a legitimate shot to beat the Crimson Tide after just beating Nebraska, but Alabama was a completely different beast. The Owls D had held Bama to just 3 points with 40 seconds left in the half, but FAU's offense wasn't giving them any help. Bama scored a touchdown to end the half, and at this pace, the Owls D would need to put a score on the board themselves. They were losing, but it wasn't for a lack of trying by Karimova, who was getting pressure and stopping the run as much as he could against a team of 5-star offensive line recruits. FAU couldn't upset Bama and took their first loss 20-0. The same statements as last season were already being made. FAU can't be a top 25 team because their offense was holding them back, and at this point it was true. And Karimova started the first 2 games without a single sack and with only 2 tackles for loss, leaving some people on the inside to believe that the Bolivian marching powder is what gave Karimova his superpowers, but they must not have watched his senior year of high school. Despite the lack of production, Karimova was becoming a cult hero at this small coastal school, and his defensive teammates were no slouches either. The front 7 for the Owls were borderline elite at both quarterback pressures and pass coverage. When the Missile stated he wouldn't be entering the transfer portal, fans called him stupid, telling him that he was never going to have a chance to beat the bigger Florida schools with his quarterback or skill position players. After finishing with only 8 sacks on the year and missing a game to detox his freshman season, AK-47 trained during the offseason with none other than the GOAT Ed Too Tall Jones again. Ed had become Arlo's football mentor at this point, Jones recognizing that Karimova had the raw athleticism and the tools to become elite, but still lacked the polish due to his lack of experience playing the game. The two worked together in the offseason on using AK-47's nerve-damaged right club hand to bat offensive linemen's hands away. During the last month of Arlo's summer, he visited his extended family back in Romania, where he got back in touch with his roots, focusing more on eating the right foods, getting plenty of sun, and working out. After letting go of the small amount of fame that Arlo was clinging to his freshman year, he was able to really focus on becoming a better player. Arlo sold his stake in the Gentlemen's Club, and he permanently swore off the powder, instead working on his own Meat Missile sports drink brand. As I already mentioned, Arlo is nothing if not entrepreneurial, although I'm not sure anyone's going to want to try a Meat Missile steak-flavored sports hydration drink. Despite that slow initial start, AK-47 came into his sophomore year in better shape than he'd ever been in, even when he was playing basketball. Arlo had added 15 pounds of muscle in the offseason and had a Giannis-esque transformation. Arlo had also met with Hansel Emanuel, a high school basketball player with only one hand that was pursuing a D1 basketball scholarship at the time. The two inspired each other to make it as professionals despite their physical limitations. Another UCF legend also reached out to AK-47 during the season. Shaquem Griffin, former star linebacker, famously made the Seahawks roster primarily as a special teamer and an exceptional athlete with just one hand. While working with Too Tall Jones helped Arlo use his size and athleticism, working with Shaquem helped him develop his skills with his unique limitations. The one player AK-47 really wanted to meet was Trey Hendrickson, an FAU legend and the all-time leader in sacks at the school. Trey was busy though at the time, of course, fighting for a playoff spot with the Bengals in the AFC North. As an added motivation, Karimova's parents decided that they would go to any game in Florida that Arlo had. On top of that, Arlo's cousins, aunts, and uncles would come to 2 away games this season. Karimova had more of a support system than ever before. They knew that Arlo needed stable support from his family to keep him off of the nose candy. Arlo had some goals that he had set for his sophomore year. He wanted to become first-team all-conference, and he wanted to win one award that he was listed for last season. He was in the top 10 for the Nagurski and the Bednarik, but it was pretty unusual for a sophomore to win these awards. Arlo's stats had begun to turn around, racking up 6 sacks in just 3 games, but the Owls had fallen to just 1-4, with their one win coming in the first game against Nebraska. Their next game wouldn't be a freebie either, as they took on number 23 ranked LSU, another SEC school. LSU had just 1 loss at this point in the season. The Owls defense was doing everything they could. Arlo and his teammates were getting sack after sack and forcing turnovers. LSU only had 14 points midway through the third quarter, but once again, the Owls offense had only put up 7 points. The Owls were closing in on their 5th straight loss. LSU ended up winning 20-7 as the Owls shifted their attention to their next in-conference matchup against Mid-Tennessee. The Lightning were just 3-3, but their offense gave the Owls some trouble last year. Arlo made a statement play to start the game, sacking Isaiah Gathings, and the defense played lights out for all 4 quarters. The one field goal the Lightning got to end the first would be their only score of the game, as an FAU DB punched the ball out on the goal line in the second quarter to stop a score. Finally, FAU's offense got some points on the board in the second half, putting up 14. With 2 minutes left in the game, the Lightning needed a 4th down conversion to stay in the game, and the Owls D completely shut them down. One of the best feelings is finally getting a taste of victory after a losing streak, and FAU partied all night in Tennessee after the game with the coaching staff. A lot of FAU fans had soured on the team, but it wasn't because of the defense, obviously. Few fans were showing up to home games, but Arlo's family was always there. Sadly, Arlo's Meat Sports hydration drink was another flop, which only added to the sadness that he was feeling at the time. His family helped him gain some perspective by reminding him of all the things that he'd been able to do now that he was a college athlete. His family was thriving more than ever before, his parents had moved into a new place, and his extended family was thinking of spending some time down in Florida. The problem was that they didn't know AK-47 had developed a gambling addiction. When one addiction goes, sometimes it can get replaced with something else, especially when things aren't going well in someone's life. Arlo felt like garbage because his team was losing despite all the work he had put in over the summer, and his sports drink was a net negative financially. Because of his new gambling addiction, Arlo pissed away all the NIL money that he had left, so his parents didn't know that they didn't have enough money to pay for the mortgage in a couple of months, and that the Karamovas' extended family wouldn't be able to visit this coming summer unless something drastic changed. Arlo's life seemed to be unraveling faster than a roll of toilet paper in a college dorm bathroom. The highs of the victories against Mid-Hill Tennessee and East Carolina quickly faded as the reality of their 3-5 record would set in every night. They likely weren't going to make a bowl game, and Arlo's individual success on the field felt like a distant consolation prize against the backdrop of his personal struggles. The next game was against Tulane, a team with a strong offense even though they were just 2-6. The Owls were the underdogs in this game, but they quickly took the lead and wouldn't look back. Even with what AK-47 was dealing with personally, sometimes the darkest moments precede a breakthrough. One evening, as Arlo was drowning his sorrows in a local bar, he received an unexpected call, and it was Trey Hendrickson, the FAU legend and sack record holder. Despite his busy schedule with the Bengals, Trey took the time out to encourage and uplift Arlo. He shared his stories of his own struggles and setbacks with FAU, emphasizing that resilience and dedication would eventually lead to success. Inspired by the unexpected mentorship, Arlo decided it was time to confront his demons. He sought help for his gambling addiction, attending counseling sessions and support groups. With a newfound clarity, he also started mending his relationships, opening up to his family about the financial struggles that they were facing. As Arlo focused on his personal growth, something shifted with the Owls locker room. The defense and offense, both fueled by Arlo's determination and leadership, began playing with an intensity and cohesion that they hadn't seen all season. In the next game against UAB, the Owls secured a decisive win, holding them to just 3 points, and Arlo, back to his dominant form, notched 2 sacks. Off the field, Arlo's family rallied around him. With the gambling addiction addressed, he managed to secure new endorsement deals, and the Meat Missile sports drink, revamped with a more palatable flavor profile, started gaining traction. Slowly but surely, the financial clouds hanging over Karimova's family finally began to dissipate. The momentum carried through the remaining games of the season. FAU, against all odds, clawed their way back to a respectable record. FAU had 2 regular season games remaining, and their first game against Southern Miss would be their last at home. To end the game, Southern Miss elected to go for a touchdown instead of taking a field goal with 3 seconds left, which gave the Owls a chance in overtime to continue their winning streak. OT was back and forth. Karimova thought that they had stopped Southern Miss, but on 4th and inches, their quarterback delivered a dime pass to AK-47 for a touchdown in the end zone. In the next OT, the Owls offense turned the ball over and Southern Miss only needed a field goal to win, but Karimova and his teammates left everything on the field, getting a sack on 2nd down and then again on 3rd down. The Golden Eagles were forced to go for it on 4th down because they were out of field goal range, and FAU got the stop. Karimova believed that they would win this game. Unfortunately, in the next OT, the Owls failed to put even 3 points on the board again, and FAU lost in triple overtime off of a made field goal by Southern Miss. AK-47 took the loss surprisingly well. The last game of the season was at James Madison, and Arlo's parents and extended family were in attendance. Arlo got a roughing the passer penalty early in the game, so you knew that he was feeling good. JMU fans looked on in horror as the 6'10 Meat Missile launched himself at the quarterback. Before the end of the half, James Madison took a touchdown lead, but in the second half, Arlo would make his presence felt. He was living in the backfield. He got a sack early and was consistently stuffing the run. He even played some pass coverage and ended up forcing a punt on 3rd and 7. Time was running out in the game, and FAU still had just 3 points. AK-47 came over to the sideline after getting a big stop on D and slapped their quarterback in the face. He said to the quarterback, "You no score, you meet pit piranhas." That was enough to put the fear of God into the quarterback, and FAU was able to put up 3 more field goals. FAU came out with the win, and the FAU fans in attendance erupted in cheers. It wasn't just a win, it was a redemption arc, a testament to resilience. FAU had come back from a 1-5 record to finish with a 5-6 record. Despite not making a bowl game, the FAU players were all smiling. As the crowd chanted Arlo's nickname nickname, Arlo embraced his family on the field. It became clear that the sophomore season had not only transformed Arlo Karimova as a player, but also as a person. The Romanian meat missile had faced his demons, conquered adversity, and emerged stronger than ever, ready to carry the lessons learned into the challenges that awaited him in his junior season. Arlo also picked up some hardware too, winning the Nagurski and the Lombardi his sophomore year while racking up 14 sacks. The next challenge was to break the all-time FAU sacks record. After an up-and-down sophomore season, Arlo Karimova and his defensive teammates had to put in an insane amount of work so that they could be considered a top 10 college defense at the beginning of the year. Despite their preparation, FAU was not in the preseason top 25. Arlo, though, was a preseason All-American after coming off an award-winning season. FAU started the season facing down the barrel of a top 10 ranked Florida team looking for their second win of the season. The Gators obviously owned this matchup over the long run, but AK-47 was bent on starting the season strong after a disappointing first half of the season last year. And just when FAU needed him most, Karimova came in with the most clutch sack with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, taking down Anthony Richardson. Up until this point, AK-47 had mostly been involved in stopping the running game. His sack ended up forcing a 4th and 6, and Arlo almost got another sack on the very next play, but Anthony Richardson escaped outside the pocket and head-scratchingly threw the ball away before picking up the first down, forcing a turnover. FAU pulled off the upset with the Gators attempting a last-second garbage time Hail Mary to make the score look better, but Arlo and the defense trained all offseason for this kind of performance, holding a top 10 team to 3 points on their home field. The next game would be much more relaxed against the FCS East. Karimova and the D wanted to maintain their no touchdown streak for as long as they could during the season. If they could hold Florida to 3, then an FCS team shouldn't even put points on the board or even cross midfield. Arlo ended up racking up 2 sacks in the win, and after a successful 2-0 stretch to start the season, Arlo had only 2 individual accomplishments left on his mind. He wanted to win the Heisman as an edge rusher, which had never been done before, and he wanted to break the all-time FAU sacks record. That was aside from the goal of going undefeated and winning the conference and making a great bowl game. FAU would go on to face their rivals since AK-47 arrived, Miami, in their 3rd game. Miami fans were talking the most after a disappointing season in Arlo's 2nd year with FAU. The Romanian meat missile disliked very few opponents, but Miami was definitely one of them, and Miami at this point was ranked 25th with a 2-1 record. The no touchdown streak was still alive after holding FCS East to 0, and the Owls D had only given up an average of 1.5 points per game in their first 2. FAU finally took a touchdown lead in the 4th and never looked back, holding Miami's potent offense to just 2 field goals and taking the win. In the next game against Appalachian State, for the first time in Arlo's tenure at FAU was finally ranked inside the top 25. FAU started off hot on D with the pick, leading to a score, and then AK-47 got a sack early and even injured the #1 receiver on App State. The Owls ended up hanging on to their no touchdown streak, keeping a clean sheet and winning the game 21-0. Appalachian State quarterback Nick Gutierrez was held to 150 passing yards and 4 interceptions. After the win, FAU was still undefeated at 4-0 and ranked 18th in the nation. On a read option in the second quarter, Karimova hit the running back so hard he had a seizure on the field, but the Owls D gave up their first touchdown of the season to the quarterback. No doubt it was an amazing 4.5 game stretch of defense to start the season, and it may very well have been the longest no touchdown streak in FAU's history. At this point though, that wasn't top of mind for AK-47. He was more concerned with the Owls holding onto their perfect record after their 2nd week inside the top 25 since his arrival. FAU's D rallied, and after giving up the 1 touchdown, they scored one themselves to tie the low-scoring game 7-7 at half. On a different note, Arlo's brother Kaysen was just entering high school, but he loved making videos about football. Arlo started bringing him to games to come watch the Owls on weekends, and Kaysen put together some more AK-47 highlight mixtapes. After extensive research about the draft, Kaysen told Arlo that he was projected to be a first-round pick for the upcoming draft if he declared after his junior season. And Kaysen was at the UAB game and caught the game altering 4th and 16 play. Arlo thought the game was about to be wrapped up, but the UAB quarterback found his receiver at the last moment near the goal line. The receiver broke free from a tackle and tied the game, sending it to overtime. In OT, the Owls forced a field goal from UAB, which FAU matched to send it to a second overtime period. Arlo didn't see the field defensively in the second overtime, but the game went to a 3rd OT when both teams found the end zone for 6. Unfortunately, FAU failed to put up even 3 in the 4th OT, and UAB walked out with a game-winning field goal to end the touchdown and winning streak for the Owls. Arlo had a minor knee injury that made him a late scratch on game day. He would return after his team picked up the win to play against UTEP. So far this season, the Owls D was still counting touchdowns. They had given up 4 in the season so far, and they were looking to keep that number to a program historic low. Arlo knew that a bye week was coming up after their their next game against East Carolina, so he wanted to give it his all while still rehabbing from the knee injury. Even after missing a few games along his career, he was just 1 sack away from breaking Trey Hendrickson's all-time FAU record of 29 sacks for a career. After UTEP's QB attempted to escape the pocket in the second, Arlo would finally achieve that goal he had set for himself from the beginning of his time at Florida Atlantic. Arlo was feasting on UTEP's O-line, but like it's been throughout his career, AK-47 could not score points for his offense. UTEP wormed their way down the field, running the option and making short throws, burning the clock. To add insult to injury, UTEP scored yet another touchdown with 18 seconds left in the game, all but sealing the loss for FAU. The Owls had gone from a 4-0 start to the season as the 18th ranked team to losing 2 out of the last 3, with their offense averaging 14 points per game over that period. It seems that the only reason FAU was undefeated to begin with is because of the end zone shutout games. If the defense couldn't keep the opposing team from scoring even a single touchdown, their odds of losing rose tremendously. To pile on, the following week they played Eastern Carolina, who was ranked 13th with a 6-1 record. The Owls were just 1 week away from their bye, and it couldn't come fast enough. After losing 2 of the last 3, FAU was at risk of losing a 3rd game. Arlo was still getting to the quarterback despite his knee injury, which was still healing up a little bit, but the Pirates took the lead with a touchdown score to end the first half. FAU had dropped 3 out of their last 4, and it felt like the sky was falling, and it was a bye week. Bye weeks are usually meant for R&R and to get your body and mind right to finish the rest of the season, but Arlo was disgusted by the outcome of the last few games. He had amassed 14 sacks over the 8 games to start the season, even though he had only played in just 7 of them. Karimova had a great chance to hit 20 sacks in a college season, which was a rare feat for a college pass rusher. For the bye week, Arlo and his friend and fellow D lineman Evan Anderson went out to Key West. Arlo typically only traveled with family, but it was nice to get out of Miami and vacation with his teammate who knew what drugs and alcohol had done to him in the past. Evan Anderson and Arlo really just chilled out in Key West, went onto a boat, did some fishing, and got some sun. Evan Anderson was telling AK-47 that he knew Arlo could get to 20 sacks and that the whole D-line was behind him and going to make it happen for him. Anderson was excited that Arlo was also going to make it to the league, whether it was this year or next. Arlo was pretty happy with his life as is and didn't feel the need to take that next step yet, considering he had so much unfinished business that he still wanted to accomplish as a team. Yeah, he wanted to win the conference again, and they could still do that this season, but he wanted FAU competing for the Natty. After returning from the bye week, they played against Southern Miss, who gave FAU the most trouble defensively out of any team they had played this season. Call it rust or whatever you want, but it was another game going down to the wire in OT, and somehow the Owls came out with a victory. The Owls were living and dying by overtime rules, which clearly wasn't the best way to keep winning record. Enough was enough. AK-47 had prepped all week to set the tone for the rest of the season against North Texas. Arlo was ready for a historic performance. He had chugged 4 meat missile steak hydration drinks in preparation for this game. AK-47 had 2 sacks in the first half, challenging his teammates on defense each time they came off the field with a stop. The Owls D got 2 more interceptions to end the half, and then in the third quarter, Arlo showed he was more than just an athlete, perfectly reading the halfback screen and nearly picking it off, but the ball just barely slid off his taped up hand. In the fourth, Arlo picked up a 5th, yes, a 5th sack in the game, stripping the ball in the process and returning it to his offense. Even though the defense didn't score the points directly, the Owls D was who put the offense in position to put points on the board. The game was essentially over, but Arlo wasn't done, getting his 6th sack of the game, which was 2 less than he had all season as a freshman. Despite this being against an average North Texas team, this game shot him up draft boards. He used every tool in the trade, whether it was a swim move, a bull rush, or a spin to get to the quarterback, and it all worked. Everything was looking up until Kaysen called Arlo before the Mid-Tennessee game and told him about some family drama. It turned out that some of Arlo's extended family back in Romania were at risk of losing their family farm. This had been central to the Karimova family for decades, and it was a core childhood memory for Arlo and his brother. The Romanian meat missile had to figure out a plan to save his family's farm. It turned out they would need the equivalent of $300,000 US. The meat missile sports drink was doing well, but it definitely wasn't doing that well. Arlo didn't have much money saved up from NIL deals because he had used most of it already to take care of his family each month, so finding $300K collecting dust in a bank account wasn't going to happen. Arlo made up his mind. He announced to his teammates and his family that he would be entering the NFL draft after his junior season. He desperately wanted to play his senior year out to take FAU to the next level, but he needed to help his family, and he also didn't believe in the direction FAU's offense was heading. His defensive teammates understood his decision, and Evan Anderson told him that he was cool with it, especially if it meant that he got to visit the farm sometime in Romania. Arlo wanted to keep the announcement private from the fans, though, so that it didn't overshadow the rest of the games in the season. This meant that the game against JMU would be his last playing on the Florida Atlantic field field, and it was bittersweet. Karimova was a finalist and was leading the polls for the Bednarik, Nagurski, and Lombardi defensive awards, but his team had not thrived like he had hoped. Back when Karimova used to be a basketball recruit, his teams rarely struggled in high school like FAU did. He was not used to losing, and he wasn't used to being a consistent underdog. AK-47 had a Kobe-like storybook ending to his college career playing at home, sacking James Madison's quarterback on 3rd down, and then getting the clutch tip on the ball on 4th down to seal the 4th straight victory for the Owls. Arlo won all 3 awards, the Nagurski, the Lombardi, and the Bednarik, but not the Heisman. The 6'10 monster DN finished with an NCAA record 46 sacks for his career, beating Jalen Ferguson's record of 45. Arlo also broke the single-season sack record of 20, previously held by Elvis Dumervil, with a ridiculous 24-sack season his junior year. Arlo had set out to break Trey Hendrickson's record and hadn't even realized he broke all the records in college football. He was truly a one-of-a-kind prospect at the end position. There was one thing left to do in Arlo's historic college career: bring home the bowl win with the 25th ranked Florida Atlantic Owls against Cincinnati. In the end, Florida Atlantic's defense had given up at a max 15 touchdowns on the season. FAU's defense had set out 1 goal ahead of the game to not give up a single touchdown to the Bearcats offense. And they had accomplished that, but Cincy's defense got a pick 6 in the 4th quarter, and they had a 3-point lead with time running out. With a minute left in the game, it was up to the defense yet again to bail out the offense and get the ball back for them. The defense forced Cincinnati to a 4th and 15, and they surprisingly went for it. The Owls were swarming though, and they got the stop, getting the ball back for their offense. Arlo and his teammates could only watch from the sideline and hope that the offense could put together a game-winning drive. With 30 seconds left on 1st down, the FAU QB threw up a Hail Mary into triple coverage in the back of the end zone, which was inevitably intercepted by a Cincinnati DB. Arlo could only look on in disgust at his quarterback, knowing he was going to be a tasty dinner for his piranhas later. Now, it was time for Arlo to get ready for the draft. It was time for the NFL draft. Time for Arlo to save his family's farm back in Romania. Former teammates and close family were in attendance in New York for the draft, and Arlo had shot up draft boards after an award-filled and record-breaking career at FAU. After reaching 24 sacks in a season, Arlo was taken with the 4th overall pick for the Arizona Cardinals. Arlo was drafted as an outside linebacker, but was going to primarily come off the edge. In college, AK-47 did play some coverage snaps, and Arizona is hoping that with his 6'10 frame, he'll be able to disrupt some passing lanes. In practice and in the preseason, Karimova had opposing offenses' attention. He was getting double-teamed regularly coming off the edge, and with little help coming from his teammates along the defensive line, the Cardinals' pass rush hardly had an impact. The Cardinals ended up finishing last in the NFC West with a bottom-tier defense. The Niners and the Seahawks were fighting for the number 1 spot in the NFC West, and Karimova finished the season with only 1 sack. Some Cardinals fans were already starting to turn on the 6'10 4th overall pick. Following a disappointing rookie season with the Cards, the team had the 7th pick in the draft. With their pick, Arizona drafted a safety out of Auburn named Demarius Kirksey. Aside from Karimova, this was likely their best draft pick in years. Kirksey was immediately startable. In practice, Karimova showed progress as a run stopper at 6'10", and despite breaking the college sacks record, he had shown little progress as a pass rusher after logging just 1 sack in his first year. Yet again, the Romanian meat missile and the Cards began the season by playing the Niners, who were still the favorites of the NFC West. Kirksey's impact was immediately felt, though, whether it was playing sticky coverage or shutting down the running game. Kirksey was obviously already an impact player on defense. Karimova, on the other hand, was struggling to get to the passer after the ban of the Romanian meat missile launch, which of course was Karimova's signature move in college. After another sad excuse for a season, the Cardinals were able to draft another outside linebacker named Kyle Smith out of LSU. Overall, the team had a great draft on both sides of the ball, hopefully giving Kyler some more weapons. To start the year, Karimova and Smith were starting on opposite ends of each other against the Eagles, with Kirksey in the back playing coverage over the top. On top of the draft class, the Cardinals had a new head coach in Mike McDaniel. Now McDaniel will be able to play against his former mentor Kyle Shanahan twice a year. Arizona and Arlo were finally moving in the right direction. After finishing with an 8-9 record and just barely missing the playoffs, the Cardinals had a mid-first round pick and stocked up on D-line talent again, drafting Brandon Portis, another defensive lineman out of LSU. AK-47 had worked all offseason on increasing his athleticism. He knew he had the skill set to be an elite pass rusher, but he needed that extra burst to get to the passer. Karimova had already worked with players like Shaquem Griffin, Trey Hendrickson, and Ed Too Tall Jones. Arizona and Arlo easily beat the Packers in their first game, though. Midway through the season, Arlo still wasn't seeing results. Kirksey, his teammate, had 2 sacks at safety, which doubled Karimova's output. Finally, against the Lions, the increase in his athleticism and working on his pass rushing technique was beginning to pay off. Karimova made contact on the quarterback, but wasn't satisfied with that. With the Cardinals down late in the third, Karimova got a huge sack and forced a safety, putting up 2 points on the board while getting the ball back for Kyler and the offense. After that statement play, the offense drove down the field, scored a touchdown, and got the 2-point conversion to tie it at 17. The defense locked at the Lions, and eventually the Cardinals kicked a game-winning field goal with the clock expiring. The Cardinals franchise and Karimova did a complete 180 this season. AK-47 and the Cardinals won the NFC West and hosted the Niners in the wild card. With the Cardinals up 7-3 in the second quarter, the Niners tried to fool the Cards D with the play action, but Karimova beat the tackle on the outside for the sack on Purdy. The Niners offense was hard to stop with so many weapons, but Arlo and Ko'o held them to just 17 points. Unfortunately, Kyler could not put more than 2 scores on the board, and the Cardinals lost by 3 in Arizona. It was still a successful season, though, all things considered. The Cardinals had finished bottom 7 in the league for the first 2 years, then tied for the NFC West division win in the third year before winning the NFC West outright in Arlo's 4th year. On top of that, Karimova made the Pro Bowl and finished 4th for the best NFC linebacker award behind Brian Burns, Rashawn Gary, and Joe Tryon. In the draft, the Cards had the 21st pick and took Dante Green, a safety out of Notre Dame. Aside from Green, the rest of the draft class was poor. Karimova still had no reason to question the Cardinals GM after the quick turnaround of the team seemingly. To start the season, AK-47 played against the Jets, who had moved on from Zach Wilson and Aaron Rodgers finally, with their new starting quarterback being a guy named Rhett Bolden. After the Jets took a lead early, Karimova got in for a sack to kick off the season. After repeatedly getting stops against a talented Jets offense, the Cardinals again failed to score more than 14 points, and the Jets walked away with the opening day victory. One thing that Karimova loved, though, was that the Cards signed Trey Hendrickson to the roster, so now 2 FAU sack legends were playing on the same defense. This seemed to be used to placate the 6'10" Romanian because the team's performance was exceptionally pathetic after coming off an NFC West division win. Karimova had the best season of his career, finishing with 88 tackles, 11.5 sacks, and an interception. Mentor and fellow FAU alumni Hendrickson finished with the second most sacks on the team at 8.5. Karimova finished second for the NFC Best Linebacker Award to Brian Burns. Karimova continued to progress. He was now an elite power rusher and a serviceable run stopper and coverage backer. The Cardinals front office failed to put a winning team together again, as the team finished with a 2-15 record. The Niners, on the other hand, were playing in the Super Bowl 1 year after their wild card matchup with the Cardinals, although they did end up losing to the Jaguars. Karimova was shocked when the Cardinals drafted a quarterback with the first overall pick, taking Darren Thompson out of Kansas State. This draft class heavily focused on offense, and for good reason. The defense was still putting up elite numbers. With this draft class in tow, the Cards surely had to get better as a whole. But something shocking occurred. Stunningly, given all the talent at the quarterback position, the head coach decided to start an undrafted third-year quarterback, Zach Nance, over both Kyler Murray and the number 1 overall pick, Darren Thompson. Through 8 games, Zach Nance had 12 touchdowns to a whopping 19 interceptions. Karimova had 5.5 sacks, while Kyle Smith had just half a sack after being drafted to help with rushing the passer. After a complete season, Zach Nance had done his best Jameis Winston impression, trying to go 30 for 30. Nance had 29 TDs to 33 interceptions. Karimova, on the other hand, had a phenomenal season, wasted by ineptitude. He finished with 91 tackles, 9 sacks, and another interception. How often do you see 90 tackles out of a pass rusher? Truly unbelievable. Karimova won Best Linebacker in the NFC and, of course, made the Pro Bowl. The Cardinals finished with 1 win on the season. It would be fair to assume Karimova was sick of the Cardinals franchise. Karimova always felt that he was a loyal person. He didn't quit easy, but some mistakes were beyond stupidity. Some problems with the Cardinals were designed that way. The owner didn't want to spend, and that was reflected in the roster and the coaching staff. The roster was constructed primarily of first contract guys, and the coaching staff had gone down the toilet once Mike McDaniel left 1 year after missing the playoffs. Things were starting to turn around after the head coach was fired and Mike Vrabel was hired on. Vrabel had the respect of the players immediately as a former player with a history of team success. Karimova was bought in once again, and in the season opener delivered a memorable 90-yard fumble return for a touchdown against the Rams. The Cardinals would go on to beat their in-division opponent, but the team wouldn't show signs of life offensively, as Darren Thompson, the first overall pick from last year, finally stepped into the starting job for the first time and finished the season with an abysmal 17 touchdowns to 20 interceptions. The life had been sucked from Karimova's performance on the field as he finished with his worst year since his rookie season. The Cardinals had just 4 wins on the season again. Karimova had 3 years left on his deal and was considering what his options would be after those years were up. He was thinking of moving on after free agency, but then came the draft. The Cardinals had the first overall pick for the second time in 3 years. With their pick, they drafted another quarterback, Artie Ross out of BYU. Karimova was shocked. He was at home with his family, and he didn't celebrate at all after the pick. Ross was a generational athlete, but nothing more. He was perhaps the biggest reach with the number 1 overall pick ever. He would likely be a bust, much like Jamarcus Russell. Karimova was finally sick of the Cardinals. He called the GM after the draft and demanded a trade. Apparently, Kirksey had called right after and demanded a trade as well, along with a few other teammates. Finally, after much coverage by ESPN, the Pro Bowl pair of Arlo Karimova and Demarius Kirksey were off to New York to play for the Jets, and that is where we will leave you for now. Karimova and Kirksey were in the Big Apple, back on the East Coast after demanding to be traded away from the Cardinals franchise. Karimova enjoyed being back out east because it meant shorter trips to see extended family and former teammates down in Florida at FAU. The Jets opened the season on Monday Night Football playing in Cleveland against the Browns. Most of all, though, the Jets were among 4 top teams labeled as contenders to win the Super Bowl this season after the acquisition of both Kirksey and Karimova on defense. At the age of 30, AK-47 had amassed nearly 50 sacks in his 7-year career up to this point. On top of that, Arlo had made over $90 million, but he also was starting to regress as an athlete. Karimova was getting slower and he was starting to lose his edge as a pass rusher. No doubt he was an upgraded position for the Jets, but he wasn't the game wrecker he was earlier in his career. This wasn't an issue though because the Jets defense was stacked with talent. They still had Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner along with some new draft picks at middle linebacker and defensive end. The addition of Kirksey and Karimova meant the Jets D could feature up to 7 or 8 Pro Bowlers. Of course, the goal was not going to the Pro Bowl though. The Jets finished winning the AFC East with a 12-5 record behind the best quarterback performance AK-47 had ever been on a team with. Rhett Bolden had 34 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in a very efficient performance for the season. The running game was solid. The number 1 receiver on the team was A.J. Brown, and defensively, neither Karimova or Kirksey had impactful seasons statistically. You could chalk it up to a new environment or getting familiar with the team and play style. Arlo finished 9th for best linebacker, and then it was time for the playoffs. In the wild card, AK-47 and the Jets would match up with their AFC East and state rivals, the Buffalo Bills. The Jets, who were now considered to be one of the Super Bowl favorites, came out rolling, scoring a touchdown on their first possession, and Karimova, with only 4 sacks in the regular season, set the tone early with a sack on Josh Allen. The Jets scored another touchdown before the Bills responded with a touchdown of their own in the second quarter. With so many defensive superstars on one team, the Jets D put opposing quarterbacks through hell, including Josh Allen. Getting the ball down the field was a chore for offenses. With the game on the line in the fourth, Allen and the Bills were in scoring position. A touchdown would take the lead, and Allen fired it to the back of the end zone, but Sauce jumped the route, and the Jets would protect home field and advance onto the divisional round, where they would meet up with Joey B and the Bengals. Karimova had a vintage performance against the Bengals in New Jersey. While in the first quarter he didn't have any sacks, he was shutting down the run and getting a ton of pressure on Burrow, forcing him to make several off-platform throws that hurt his ability to get the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And when you've got a mountain of a man coming at you, sometimes you can't help but throw picks when the secondary is lined with all-pro talent like Sauce Gardner and Demarius Kirksey. Burrow remained unfazed though. On 4th and 3, he found Joe Mixon underneath for a walk-in touchdown to regain the lead 14-7, which was a backbreaker. Karimova settled the crowd down with a huge, sweaty sack. That sack wouldn't be enough though, as the Bengals marched down the field and scored 2 straight touchdowns to take the lead in the fourth quarter. Luckily, Rhett Bolden was throwing darts for the Jets, and so Karimova and the D were asked to hold off the Bengals with a 3-point lead and a minute left in the game. The Bengals were still on fire after coming off of 2 straight touchdown drives, and Joe Burrow could not miss. But when the Bengals got into field goal range, Burrow took a shot at the end zone and it was picked off, just like in the Bills game when they needed it most. So the Jets and Karimova would advance to the AFC Championship game for the first time in Arlo's career to play against the Ravens. The Jets were going through a QB gauntlet facing Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and then Lamar Jackson, but Rhett Bolden and the star-studded defense were standing up to the test. Arlo had a chance to make one of the biggest plays of his career to return a pick 6 on the Ravens' opening drive, but he just barely missed putting the ball between his hand and his club. Again, AK-47 was a unit in the run game, shutting down Lamar's QB scrambles and option keepers. For being a slower edge-rushing linebacker, Karimova's size helped him a lot with containing Lamar. The Jets went to half after a Ravens field goal with a 17-6 lead, and the Jets scored another touchdown, but the Ravens obviously weren't going out without a fight. Lamar found his running back on a slant, and he took it all the way to the Jets' red zone before being pushed out. Lamar threw a dime into the end zone and made it a 2-score game again. But again, Rhett Bolden was throwing steamers, scoring another touchdown and cementing the Jets' place in the Super Bowl. And just like in the previous 2 playoff games, the Jets effectively ended it with another interception. The Jets would end up playing the Bears of all teams in the Super Bowl. Arlo had been pressing his teammates all week to put just one more game together, The level of intensity and drive they had shown on defense throughout the playoffs looked like it legitimately put fear into the opposing quarterbacks' hearts. Arlo was playing his best football in years during this run, and so was the secondary. Arlo flew all of his family out to the game in Georgia, and he told his family that he had a special surprise announcement after the game. AK-47 also had the support of his former teammate at FAU, Evan Anderson, and Evan joked that this was the second best defense Arlo had ever been a part of, besides the FAU defense that gave up single-digit touchdowns for a whole season. Cole Kmet was shocked when Arlo dropped back in pass coverage to defend his out route. Arlo had a second near interception. The Jets scored a touchdown and the Bears settled for a field goal, and with the Jets up 17-13, Arlo and the D had 2 minutes left before earning their Super Bowl title. The Bears quarterback, Jake Shelley, was making throws with pinpoint accuracy on big downs, and Karimova was starting to feel some nerves as it came down to the wire. Karimova didn't anticipate this close of a game against a relatively young quarterback. AK-47 told his secondary that he needed just one more play out of them. They had one pick to end the game in each of their last three. Arlo wanted just one more, and he got it. Sauce Gardner came up with a game-clinching pick, and Kirksey and Karimova won their first Super Bowl together in their first year with the Jets. After winning it all, the Romanian meat missile accomplished all he had set out to in his football career. At the college level, Arlo broke every sack record in the book, and at the professional level, Karimova won the best linebacker in the league, made over 6 Pro Bowls, and won a Super Bowl. Football was never Karimova's passion, but rather a vehicle to get him where he wanted to go. AK-47 made well over $100 million in his career, considering his salary, endorsements, and his meat missile sports hydration drink. Arlo saved the family farm and overcame his addiction to have an amazing career and set his family up for life. With all that considered, Arlo announced his retirement from football effective immediately after the Super Bowl. AK-47 went out on top and proved that athletes come in all shapes and sizes with different levels of abilities. Arlo, inspired by the likes of Hansel Emanuel and Shaquem Griffin, decided to move back to Romania with his family and play professional basketball, which was his real passion. Arlo had been regaining control of his hand slowly over the course of years with training, and he had been practicing to use his non-dominant hand as well to dribble, shoot, and pass. Demarius Kirksey went on to win 2 more Super Bowls with the Jets before retiring, and former FAU teammate Evan Anderson visited Romania twice a year to see his friend Arlo. Kaysen, Arlo's brother, went on to play soccer semi-professionally in Romania because that was quote-unquote a real sport, and AK-47 would later be inducted into the Hall of Fame for his career achievements.